You're listening to the Men's Dating Mastery Podcast with host Alec Chase, bringing you the experts in dating, sex, and relationships.
Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the MDM podcast. My guest today is Fawn Gilmore Kraut. Fawn is a relationship coach who works with women specifically and so has insights from a uniquely female perspective. Fawn and Steve Horseman recently held a combined workshop, and today's interview is based on the insights derived from that workshop. If you have been keeping up with the podcast, then you will recognize Steve as a repeat guest on the show from episodes 4 and 21. If you haven't heard those episodes yet, then I highly recommend that you check them out. They're among my personal favorites. Today's conversation is all about what both men and women want, what they settle for and why, and how to break past the limitations that are holding you back in order to get what you want. At the same time, we keep the conversation grounded in reality and draw a distinction between settling for too little versus accepting what is realistic. Also, for those of you who are regular listeners, you may have noticed that podcast episodes are being released a little less frequently than before. This show is a work of passion for me, but it is not how I make my living. So, new episodes will be airing on a slightly less frequent basis, at least in the near term. But do continue to tune in, as there are more interviews with new and excellent guests coming your way. Hope you enjoyed this episode. On a separate note, if you have been keeping up with the podcast, then you already know that one of my guests, Frank Kermit, has been kind enough to give away 3 of his products for free to you, the listeners of MDM. These products are an ebook called The Emotional Needs of Women, a 3-set audio program called The Art of Charisma, from Creepy to Charisma, and another 5-set audio program called Pimping Your Pad. These are serious, in-depth products that normally go for $270. Frank was generous enough to give them away for free in order to encourage you to keep listening to the show. To get them, all you need to do is go to the show notes for episode 14, called Using Body Language to Create Attraction with Patty Contenta, or episodes 15 and 16, which are parts 1 and 2 of my interview with Frank Kermit called The 10 Emotional Needs of Women. You can find all 3 of these pages by going to the podcast page on mensdatingmastery.com and scrolling through the list. Once you're there, just click on the link under the title Free Giveaway at the top of any of the 3 pages to get the downloads. Like I said, these products represent $270 in value, which is why they will be available only until September 16th of 2015. After that, the only way to get them will be to buy them just like everybody else. So get them while they are still free. Now on to the interview. Hi Fawn, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with me.
Hi Alec, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, to get us started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Fawn Gilmore Kraut. I am a relationship coach for single professional women. So I work with single women who are fed up with being invisible, and I help them to get noticed by the men who will love, respect, and cherish them so they can finally meet their ultimate life partner.
Okay, excellent. So I think we'll have a very useful perspective from the female side in this conversation. And so you and I chatted a little bit offline, and the basis of our conversation is actually a workshop that you ran dedicated to what both men and women want and what they settle for. So let's start there. What do people want? I mean, let's start with the women. What do women want?
Okay. So when I do my workshops, usually they're all women, but sometimes I've been mixing it up a little bit and bringing in the men, and it's really fun when that happens. But I will say consistently in my workshops, when women tell me what they want, as well as on the consultations that I do with them, there are some, it always varies with women, but there's some really consistent qualities that show up every single time. So I'd love to dive into that, a few of those. One is women want men who are emotionally available. It's frustrating to them if they meet, they fall for a guy and then they find out that he's kind of got one foot still in another relationship. Oh, he's not quite divorced, or he's, still, got someone else on the string and he's not ready to be 100% connected to them. So that's very high on the list. Women want a relationship that is based on trust. They want fun. They want sense of humor. They want to have somebody that shares their values. Of course, they want to have great sex. And someone who will give them the freedom to pursue, like they have what they share in common, but they also each have their own interests. So they're not just pulled in and smothered in a relationship. They want to have the freedom to pursue their careers, pursue their interests, and have their own lives, as well as have that deep connection with their partner. Those are some of the really big, prominent ones. And of course, respect. Mutual respect is super important.
Let's explore them a little bit. So the first one you said, and I find this one particularly interesting. It's come up quite a bit in my prior conversations, and this is emotional availability. You mentioned that one of the common reasons why a man might not be emotionally available is if he's still got someone else in his life, or perhaps he's not fully over somebody he may have had in his life recently. Is that usually the reason, or are there any other reasons that you observed?
Yeah, sometimes the other reasons are they think they're available when it comes down to really making a commitment or really being all in with someone. They're hesitant for whatever reason. They're like afraid to really, commit. The women that I work with are ultimately they're looking for a commitment. They want marriage, or they want a long-term committed relationship. They're not looking for quick hookups or somebody to date for a little while. They're looking for the one. And so when they're with someone who, sometimes the men, it's like they seem that way at first, but then when it comes down to it and it's time to start talking about commitment, all of a sudden they're backpedaling. They're, basically their own commitment fears come up. And for whatever reason, they hesitate to take the next step.
Okay. And to what extent have you explored those underlying reasons?
With the men?
With the men,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious what you have to say about it, but I know from it's what I hear from the women is that the men are afraid. And I guess I can say, in my very unscientific survey with the men is, I think that again, I think you may be able to speak to this more, and I'm interested in what you have to say about it. But I think the men are afraid of being trapped, or they're afraid of repeating what they had maybe in a bad marriage, or what their parents had, or whatever. And, it's like, I like having this relationship, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go all in. There's a vulnerability that happens in a really, when you're in a deep committed relationship, it's vulnerable.
I'm happy to share my thoughts, and there's certainly a lot of reasons why guys might be emotionally unavailable, and some of those are common to healthy guys. In some cases, guys might have their own internal demons that they just haven't conquered yet, and so those might be the reasons. But let's say in a quote-unquote healthier male, some of the reasons that I find come up are, and you mentioned one, and that's protecting their sense of freedom. I think that's huge for a lot of guys. Mm-hmm. And very often a relationship in a man's mind can often be equated with giving that freedom up. It's actually something I spoke about quite a bit with my very first guest on this podcast. And so the trick. And to be honest, I haven't quite figured it out for myself yet, but finding that freedom in the context of a relationship. So to have both, to have a deep, committed relationship and yet still preserve your sense of freedom. I think that's a big one for guys. Another one is career. For a man to truly feel like a man in many cases, and he needs to feel like he can provide. That's irrespective of whether or not he needs to provide. He might, for example, be with a woman who's financially very successful on her own, but for him to feel adequate, he needs to have, his career and his finances in order. And, some guys are just not there yet. And so that might preclude him from getting into a relationship.
Yeah, I absolutely, I see that. And, I try to work with my women to be discerning of some of those things early in the relationship when they're first getting to know someone. I mean, if my women are really ready, and they're really ready for a committed relationship, and I recognize relationships take time to even decide if this is somebody you do want to spend the rest of your life with. But if the guy's not ready for very legitimate reasons, he could absolutely be healthy in very many ways, but if he's not ready for that level of a commitment, then the woman needs to be really aware of that. Because if she is ready and he's not, and she's going forward with the relationship, it's a setup for disappointment and frustration for both of them. And I think that goes both ways, probably for the guys as well, but.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I think is a very relevant factor, and that's timing. A lot of times timing can make it or break it. If it's not the right time in a person's life, then it just isn't the right time. And sometimes, at least kind of in my experience as a man, I noticed that women will choose to ignore that, even if they know it. They tend to believe that they will be the exception.
Oh, right. Yes. Right? Yes. A lot. I experienced that. Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll tell them and they won't hear it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we're different. I'm different. It's going to be, yeah. Or I can fix him. That's a big one. And which I know, I'm pretty sure guys don't really like that, especially healthy men don't want to be fixed.
No, not at all. And I mean, we're talking about healthy guys, but let's face it, I would argue that the majority of the human population is probably not healthy in some shape or form. And by that, I don't mean they belong in a home, but everybody's got their baggage, right? And so some guys might be with a woman that they really shouldn't be with, right? And so they're not committing because they might be in that relationship because they're comfortable, because they're getting the sex that they fear they might otherwise not get. But deep down in their subconscious, they know that this is not the right woman for them. And so they kind of, as disappointing as it may be, they're probably just stringing that woman along, right?
Yes. Yes. And I know plenty of women who like to be strung along in that regard. I mean, I've had so many women come to me and say, I just broke up from my boyfriend. We were living together for 7 years, and I, finally had enough and left. It's like, why? Why would you spend 7 years of your life with someone, and it would usually be that, the guy was really comfortable. He's got it work, this is great. I got everything I need, and she comes out of the relationship feeling depleted, used, confused. What happened? Why wouldn't he really love me? And, it's, oh my goodness, the hurt is so deep, and it takes a long time and some deep work to get past that, to be willing to trust again. And a lot of times for the women, it's learning to trust themselves, to really make a better decision the next time.
And, I always wonder if in a situation like that, the issue are insecurities on both sides of the fence, because if a guy's stringing a woman along and staying in a relationship that he himself is feeling pretty half-hearted about, I would argue that he probably doesn't have the confidence or the belief that he can do better. And so he's walking this middle ground.
And the woman feels the same way about herself.
Exactly.
That's why they stay together. And they're both really just settling.
Right. Actually, maybe we can use that as a segue. One of the things that you've covered is what men and women settle for. So what do women settle for, since we're talking about women for now?
Okay. So the women, a lot of times they'll settle for men who are, or relationships. I'm going to say this relationships because sometimes it's something that's in the relationship, not just the guy, but her as well. Like addiction, not having the same values, being superficial, narcissists. Again, like I said, unwilling to commit, emotionally inconsistent, hot and cold. Not real emotionally connected, like unwilling to really go deeper and to share what's happening internally, so that they stay on the superficial level. Dishonest, sometimes unfaithful. They know he's cheating on them and they'll stay in the relationship anyway, or they keep attracting men. They keep getting into relationships with men who cheat on them. These are patterns that my women, like they say, they've repeated over and over again. I keep attracting men who, and they list it, and it's over and over again. And the men actually shared the same thing about what they keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So that's when we have to go deeper and go look at, well, why? Because you're the one common denominator here. So maybe it's time to stop and take a look at that. But we settle, we talk about, I keep attracting this. And that's when I say, okay, why are you settling for this when what you want is this other? And yet you keep settling for this.
And so what's the answer?
So what I have them do, and I had the guys do the same thing, is identify. I take them through a little exercise. So we start out with what you want. They list those qualities and they identify really the key ones. Like they circle the 3 that are the most powerful, have the most energy around. And we do the same thing about what they've been settling for. Same thing. What are those qualities that you're most frustrated about? And then we turn it around and see, how is that quality living in you? Or I could say, how is that quality living in me? So, like, if I keep attracting men who are abusive, where am I abusive? And of course, the first response is, I don't abuse anybody. I'm not that way. Well, okay, stop and consider, in what ways are you abusing yourself? Perhaps in the way you talk to yourself. You're constantly telling yourself that you're stupid. Do you not take care of yourself? Do you neglect your body and your health? So if I have this view of myself that makes it okay for me to abuse myself, then I'm going to be okay. I'm actually going to end up attracting somebody who agrees with me.
So are you saying that, in essence, when a woman is settling for qualities that she doesn't want, the qualities that she's attracting her respective partner are really a mirror image of what she's got going on? In
some way or another, yes. If she's willing to look deep. Sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes you have to kind of explore a little bit. But there's some reason why this kind of guy feels really comfortable with you. And I would turn it around for your guys. It's the same thing for them. Why do I keep attracting women who are here's some of the things they're saying: superficial, always taking, very self-serving, dishonest, unsupportive, judgmental. Why do those women feel so comfortable with you? So it's like, what part of you actually feels comfortable with these kinds of women? You say you don't want it.
Okay, so I'd like to explore that further with you, but just before we start talking about the guys, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you about what women are settling for. And so I got a sneak preview to some of the things that your women put on the list. And one of them says pays for everything. And there wasn't really context around that. So I'm curious, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the woman having to pay for everything and kind of settling for that, or they have a problem with guys who are paying for everything?
Well, in this particular context, I didn't mention that one when we were talking about it because we're looking at the notes from one of the workshops, and I said, what have you been attracting? And so women are telling me over and over. And one of the women said, I keep attracting, the guy paid for everything, which seemed like really nice. And what she realized later on was that as she got deeper into the relationship, he wanted to keep her, on one hand, like you're talking about, he wants to be the provider. This guy who paid for everything didn't want her to really have her own career or even have, it's like a way of, it turned into like control, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like, I mean,
so,
of
so
course,
you're saying he was keeping her independent?
Yes. Or wanted to, yeah.
Okay. I found that really curious because I've never heard that being voiced as a complaint from women, but also because I think as social values and social norms are changing and women are becoming more and more economically empowered, financial responsibilities are becoming increasingly blurred. And at least from my side, from the male side, I observe more and more men who are becoming progressively more and more uncertain as to what appropriate code of conduct is when it comes to bills and payments and financial responsibilities. And I've been hearing recently more and more people advocating for just going back to the way things were traditionally, where the man just pays for everything. But I think it's still a source of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. And I hesitate to do a blanket statement of like, okay, this is the way it is, or to, the rules. Because where I go is, I mean, all relationship is negotiation. That's like a principle that I teach my women, is that we're constantly, whether we're aware of it or not, we're negotiating in every relationship. We learn to ask for what we want and, be conscious of the other person's needs. And I think as we are sensitive and to the person that we're with, we can pick up on what do they want and what do they need and what feels comfortable for me. And we kind of figure it out as we go. And I hesitate to put down, okay, these are the rules. This is what we should all do, because we're individuals.
Do you find that there's a common set of expectations among the majority of women when it comes to finances specifically? So naturally, I think we're both in agreement that no two individuals should be expected to be the same, but do you see a pattern among women as to what they prefer?
Well, when you're talking about like who pays for dinner on a date, yeah, traditionally the man pays. And I've heard what I really like, and I think a lot of women are comfortable with. Whoever initiates the invitation is the host, and that person would pay. So if the guy is initiating, say, hey, I'd like to take you out for dinner, then he's going to pick up the bill. If she initiates, then she should pick up the bill. Do it that way.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. So I'm the host, right? So that's in a dating situation. Now, if you're in a committed relationship where you're sharing finances, then that's something that, I think, traditionally, in the old way, the man pays the bills but really traditionally the man pays the bills and the woman stays home and, raises the kids.
Yeah, and now we live in a world where it's becoming increasingly more common for the woman to out-earn the man, and often by a significant margin.
Yeah, and I've been married, tell you guys, and the women who will be listening to this too. I've been married to my husband for 15 years. And I was single for a long time, and all of that. We finally, through a whole long story, I tell my women about, finally came together, and we have a great marriage. I love my husband. We're as in love now as when we got married, and our finances have shifted so dramatically over those years beyond anything we would have either one of us expected. But because we're in a deep, committed relationship, we just work together. We work it out. We talk about it. It's like, okay, right now I'm earning more. Another time you're earning more. Okay, this is what we need. What do we need? What do we need to come together to create? And if you're, for both the men and the women, if you're stuck in an expectation of roles of like, okay, well, you have to do it this way because that's how mom did it, or vice versa, you're in trouble because you're building a life together, and life happens and it's unpredictable.
All right. And so the conversation shifts from, mine and yours and who's responsible to ours, and we're both responsible.
Yes. Yes. So one of the skills that I work with my women on is learning how to speak up. Because a lot of women, have been raised, especially if you're, later 30s, 40s on up, maybe younger, 20s might be different, but raised to stay quiet, to let the man lead and not speak up, not, to submit our desires. And so I really work with women on using their voice, not out of anger, not in the place of the battle of the sexes. It's not that. It's to contribute your perspective, your voice, what you feel, what you need, and what you can contribute so that you really are equal partners in the relationship. Because that's what it's like. Your man needs that, you need it. So both partners need to have, that's what a really healthy relationship is. Both people really sharing honestly. If you've got conflict, it's like talk it through, work it out, get through to the other side. So that because each of you has a perspective and something to bring to the table to get you to something that's better than either one of you could do alone.
Right. So I'd like to shift the conversation to men and kind of explore some of the same issues a little bit further in depth. But before we go to that, there's just one lingering question. I'm yo-yoing here a little bit, bouncing back and forth, but I'm curious. You mentioned that one of the things that women have expressed desire for is essentially freedom to pursue other interests, wants, careers, whatever it may be, that's beyond the intimate relationship they're sharing with the partner. And I was wondering if you could just shed a little bit more light onto that statement. What is it that women are seeking when it comes to this need for freedom?
Well, I think it's similar to what you mentioned that men may be feeling as well. But it's just that, they want to have shared interests, things we can do. Hey, we both love kayaking, we both love, whatever it is that, you have your common interests in the things that you love to do together. But I think underneath the whole thing is women don't want to get lost in the relationship. I think that's the fear, is that they lose their identity. They get absorbed into this relationship. And so they want to be able to still pursue their interests, their hobbies, their life, their career, whatever it is, without the guy feeling threatened by that. because a lot of the women who come to me have come out of relationships where their men were threatened by their independence or threatened by their other interests or the time they spent with their girlfriends. Now, I know it goes the other way around with guys with their buddies, but this is from the women's perspective. They want to be able to pursue their desires and their interests and still keep that deep connection with their partner.
Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward, and you're right. It's not unlike what your typical guy would want as well. So let's talk about the guys. Same kind of questions. I'm curious. Let's just talk on the core stuff, because I'm sure every single guy has their own idea of what they would like. But what are some of the common wants that guys have been expressing?
Well, the guys that for my workshop, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'd love to hear more from you as well on this, but some of the things that they've told me they want a woman who's nurturing. They want a woman who's intelligent, supportive, has a good sense of humor, sexy. Yes, they were like, yes. Like they say, don't judge me for being superficial. They want somebody that they're attracted to. There's chemistry. They want someone who's honest. I found the guys' list wasn't that different from the women as far as what they want. It's, they want to be accepted. They want to have romance. They want to be understood. They want really good, clear communication. Was interesting. They want women who are financially responsible. That's another one that meant the women tell me that as well. So selfless, adventurous. Those are, really, I think, common things. You could tell me, maybe add to this. This was a small selection of guys I was interviewing, but
I would be in agreement with the majority of those. I think some of those things, like adventurous, might vary from one guy to another. It's certainly a quality that I always seek, just because that's who I am. But there are people who are a little bit more steady Eddie in the way they live life, and for them, adventure is pretty low on the list. And so that might be a little bit more individual. One thing that you did not mention, but that we already explored quite a bit from the female perspective, and I think it's very important for men, is just somebody who gives a guy his space. And there's a book, it's a classic, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and I'm still working my way through that book. It's a little dryly written for my taste, but I think the concepts are correct. And one of the things it talks about is men need their independence, and sometimes they need to retreat into their cave. And the best thing a woman can do for them is to leave them alone. And I think this is where a lot of the things that we've been discussing up until now are actually very, very similar between men and women. But this is the one respect in which I believe we differ. When a woman is working through something, she wants support, she wants conversation, she wants someone to listen. When a man is going through the same thing, we just want to be left alone. A lot of times we just want solitude to process whatever it is we're dealing with, to come up with a solution, to implement that solution. Then we can come out of our cave and be ourselves again. But we need that space. And the more we feel that space is being threatened, the further we're going to pull away.
Yes. I am in full agreement with you on that. And I know it's a generality, but it's the masculine and the feminine energy is kind of where I look at. There are exceptions, but I think in general, yes. And with women, I know for us, myself, when I'm working through things, I don't want to go into my cave. I want to talk about it. That's how I get clarity, is by discussing, like, okay, I talk to my husband. I can't wait to sit down and talk about it, or with my girlfriends. And what I need is somebody to listen to me. And, in the book, I know he's like, it's true. It's like, don't fix it. Just listen. So, yeah. And I know it frustrates the guys, when the woman is like banging down the door, coming into the cave, why won't you listen to me? Or, we chase. When the women start chasing to try to, get him to talk to her, it actually drives him away.
Yeah, and that's where that sense of freedom is being threatened, which we spoke about earlier, right?
Right, exactly.
Guys, your typical guy is a problem solver, right? So if he has a problem, he wants a solution. If somebody comes to him with a problem, his instinct is to provide a solution. If there is no solution, he doesn't want to think about it because it just makes him feel worse.
Right. Inadequate, frustrated.
Yeah, and so one of the things you mentioned that guys want is clear communication, and this is where I believe it breaks down, because women who haven't taken the time to learn and understand how a man's mind works, and a man who hasn't done the same on his part, the two parties are communicating in their own respective languages, and they don't know how to translate what they really want to one another in a way that the other can understand.
Yes, and it just leads to more frustration. Absolutely. And if you're, and I find we, in our insecurities, and that I think sometimes what happens is it, like when the guy goes in his cave and the woman wants to talk and he's withdrawing, it triggers, especially if she hasn't really done some work on herself, it triggers her insecurities. Suddenly she's feeling rejected, just like my dad rejected me, or it's like we trigger it back to something in the past. And we assume, I will say over and over and over again, the women I talk to, the women I work with, and and for my own self, until I really started to do this work, but it still pops up. We blame ourselves. We assume there's something wrong with me. If you won't talk to me, it must mean something's wrong with me. So I've done something wrong, I said something wrong, or more deeply, I am wrong. Something's defective. And I feel rejected, and then I just spiral down into my pit.
Yeah, typical. And I think for men and women to make things personal, right? If something's wrong, it means they're wrong. I think both guys and the ladies do that. But I'd like to jump forward a little bit now. So there's certainly things that men and women want. There's certainly things that they're both settling for that are less than their ideal. And I know you've explored this. What's holding people back? What's causing them to settle for less than what they really want?
On the surface, it's like because we think that we can't do better. We think that what we really want is too ideal and it doesn't exist. Or, like women tell me, all the good men are taken. That's what I hear. All those things. We have all that, our reasons lined up. And so we settle for what's in front of us. But, to take the leap, to actually do the work of believing that it's possible, believing that I'm worth it. I'm worth more than this. And doing the work to actually come into that reality, so I'm standing in it confidently and believing that, we're afraid to take that risk.
If there is one thing that I would want to explore with you out of everything you just said, and I think this is really important, it's believing that whatever you might want is too idealistic, that maybe it doesn't exist. And I find that very, very interesting thought, because on the one hand, I'm all for people shooting for the stars and chasing their dreams and really getting their ideal life, whether it's in a romantic relationship or their careers or anything for that matter. Mm-hmm. But there's also such a thing as reality. And there's also such a thing as entitlement, because you may want things, but you have to deserve them. You can't just walk around feeling entitled to have them. And I think that's something that comes up with people quite a bit, as they want and they demand, and not to pit men and women against each other in this conversation, but I've definitely observed that from the female side, where it's, I want a guy who does this and this and that and speaks to me like this. And if he says that, well, then he's out. And my question is, well, okay, what are you bringing to the table? That's what you want. But what do you bring to the table? So I just put a whole lot of things out there, but what are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I do. And I experience that same thing. And what's the missing piece, and where it turns around from entitlement. For number one, I would say for the women, believing it's a dream, a dream. Dreams are dreams. But if you want it to become a reality, first of all, it starts with you. You're not just entitled to it because you dream it. You are worth it, yes, but it doesn't mean it's going to be handed to you. You've got to first start with yourself. It's like, if I really say I want a guy who's financially responsible, then I need to be financially responsible. If I want a guy who I can trust, then I need to be trustworthy. If I want a guy who's going to speak to me with respect, then I need to speak to everyone with respect, including myself. It's like, we forget, we want him to give it to us while we're not willing to give it to ourselves and to the other, to him. So it starts with ourselves. We're not entitled to it by virtue of, hey, this is my dream, so the world owes me, which I think is really common in our culture, and it's a fallacy. Mm-hmm. We're worth it. We deserve it in the sense of, I think by birth, it's our birthright to be loved. It's our birthright to love and to be loved. I think that's why we're here on the planet, personally.
I love your answer. I've had this conversation offline more than once, and I always say the same thing. The same thing you just said is, well, if you want X, Y, and Z, then you have to start by cultivating those qualities in yourself, and only then will you be a person who deserves to attract a significant other with those same qualities. So I'm completely on the same page with you, but let's talk about the other side of it. Let's talk about realistic expectations. So we might want the stars. At what point do we need to take a realistic perspective and say, okay, this is what I want. Is this realistic? Should I be a little bit more open-minded? Should I be more flexible in terms of what I will accept and what I can be happy with? Where do we draw that line between settling and just having a healthy, realistic perspective on what's possible?
That's a great question. Beautifully put, too. I think when we're in an ideal, we've got the stars, we've got this ideal in this big list. Like for me in my life, in my single years, my list kept changing depending on the guy I was dating. And I would always sort of raise the bar. He was never good enough until I finally realized that was my way of hiding out and not having to commit, because so the realistic piece of it is the person you commit to ultimately is never going to be this ideal person. What the real work is creating the relationship that you really want, where you both agree, this is really what I want, and let's go for it. Let's see how close we can get. But it's something that you build over time together versus expecting this ideal, dream to be handed to you. It's work.
That's interesting. So my way of interpreting that is, rather than looking for the complete package to show up in your life, look for somebody who's got the potential and the willingness and the desire to become that with you and to grow into that. That's interesting because it can be very easy, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past, where if what's in front of me is in some shape or form short of what I want, then I just walk away. And I think a lot of people do that, men and women. And so there's an element of discernment that I think needs to be cultivated to help a person decide, is this a situation I walk away from, or is this a situation that I work through and try and grow into?
Yes. And I'm reading a book. It's really, really great. I'd recommend it to all your audience and mine. It's called Deeper Dating. And I don't have it in front of me with the author's name, and I think he's very well known, and forgive me for that. Maybe we can put it in the notes. But he talks about there's the attractions. I don't want to take too much time on this one, but when we're in touch with our own deep core values, those things that are like the real essence of who we are, of our deepest, highest self, when we know that piece about ourselves, and we find someone who complements those values, they may not have all the other superficial trappings that we have on our list, but we share that core value. We may not have this instant spark. It might be a slow growing building of a relationship and a friendship that may develop into something more over time. But if those values are there and are shared, you've got a really great foundation to build an awesome relationship. Where if we have that instant spark, this, great, this chemistry, ooh, she's so hot, or vice versa, or whatever it is, that may be great on the short run, but in the long term, very likely, once you get into the nitty gritty, it all falls apart. Mm-hmm. So, I like to encourage women. It's like, look for character. Look for those core values that you can build a house on. So he's balding a little bit. So it's not, this love at first sight, across the crowded room. Yeah, that may happen, but it may be that this person is somebody that you could really build a life together that would be deeply rewarding and fulfilling, because you share those same most important values that you really don't want to compromise. If those aren't present in a relationship, you've got cracks in your foundation already. But if they are there, a lot of the other stuff you can work through.
Right. That's valuable. I think that's valuable for both genders. I'll look that book up and I will put it in the show notes so anybody who wants to read it can have access. We're starting to run a little bit short on time, but I don't want to end it without exploring one last topic. And I think we've started going down that path a little bit. And so if you could just provide a few short comments on this, it can certainly be explored in depth, but let's keep it brief. And so the question is, we've talked about what people are settling for. We've highlighted the fact that usually it's themselves holding themselves back. And so what are some tips you can offer people to start breaking through those limitations that they carry with them?
I would say, step one, get honest with yourself. Do a little inventory of looking at the relationships that you have that you feel like maybe you've been settling for. Really look at it objectively. If you can step back, and it's a good thing to do with a friend or a coach to take a look to see what are the consistent themes, what keeps showing up that's frustrating me. Just get conscious about it. And then have the courage to look and say, if this was a mirror, what would it be telling me? And what part of me is allowing this to happen, and why? What am I getting out of it? What is it? Where am I living these same qualities? And do the same thing with the ideal relationship. Yeah, go ahead, list it out. What is it that you really, really want? And what are the key qualities in that? And ask yourself the same question. how is this living in my life? Or where am I not living up to this? And then make it your number one task before it's like, go out and find your guy or find your woman. Make it your number one task to cultivate those qualities within yourself. And be, in that process, get really clear about what is it that you value the most in your life, even about yourself. And how can you cultivate those things even more? So like you're becoming the one for someone else. The more you do that, the more you're going to attract people who match your values. And the more a solid foundation you're laying for your future relationships. And I would say, reach out for help, ask for a coach, talk to people. There are people who can help you work through this. You don't have to do it alone.
Great. Thanks so much for that advice, Fawn. I think that'll help some people. Final question. If people want to learn more about you and how they can work with you or what you've got out there, where can they go?
They can go to my website. It's fawngilmorekraut.com, which is almost up. My old website is breakthroughintolove.com. So we'll link that one for now. And then when the new one comes up, we'll put that in on the notes if that's all right. And then they can go there. They can email me at fawngilmorekraut@comcast.net. And I have an ebook that's coming out. It's called 7 Keys to Attracting the Man Who Will Love, Respect, and Cherish You. Now, obviously, this ebook is written for women, but the principles that are in it are universal. I believe they'll apply to your guys as well, so they may find it interesting, or they may have women that they love that they want to send this to. So that will be available. It's coming out next week. So if it's not up yet, just stay tuned or send me an email and I'll make sure you get a copy.
Fantastic, Fawn. Thanks again for the conversation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Alec. This has been fun.
That is it for this interview, guys. Don't forget that you can get Frank Kermit's 3 products, the Emotional Needs of Women ebook, the Art of Charisma from Creepy to Charisma 3-set audio program, and the Pimping Your Pad 5-set audio program by visiting the show notes for episodes 14, 15, or 16, all of which can be found on the podcast page at mensdatingmastery.com. Once you've found the show notes, click on the link under the title Free Giveaway at the top of the page to get the products. Remember that these products represent $270 in value and therefore will be available only until September 16th of 2015. So you only have a limited time to get them for free. After that, you'll have to shell out some money just like everybody else. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to Men's Dating Mastery, a podcast dedicated to improving the lives of men and the women around them.